It's Astrology Roast. I think it needs to sound like a shitty intro, like a funny shitty intro.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the third ever episode of Astrology Roast. My name's Keren and I'm here with the lovely co-facilitator Etai. Now this week we've gone a little bit on a tangent. So for those who enjoyed our last episode, we did mention that we'd be diving into exploring the sign of Taurus today. But then me and Etai had a bit of a chat about that and realised that it might be a bit boring to spend a whole episode talking about Taurians, and we didn't really care.
Yeah.
So,
as my grandma always used to say, my podcast, my choice.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to talk about Saturn Return, Saturn's Return.
Saturn.
Yes, the return, this is a belonging S, so the return of Saturn, which is super interesting to anyone that is approaching 30, to anyone that one day will approach 30, and to anyone that already did. Because this is a very special thing that happens when every 30 years. But we're going to, first, before even talking about what is Saturn's return, we should talk about what is or who is Saturn.
Oh, who?
So Saturn is the second largest planet. I was obviously doing a lot of research for this episode, and I was shocked to discover that Saturn is actually just gas. There's no matter on this planet. It's just a ball of gas.
What?
And explosions. Yeah.
Gas and explosions.
It's a planet that's made out of explosions and gas and stuff, but it's beautiful. But besides being a planet, it was also a god. It was started as a Greek and then Roman, or I don't really, god of creation, god of agriculture, renewal, liberation. In mythology, he used to eat his children. Wasn't the best god.
I would eat my children.
Wasn't the best dad, but who is the best dad?
Yeah.
The
Daddy Issues episode is coming up later on. Don't worry.
It is coming. And in astrology, Saturn is a planet that a lot of time mentioned with fear. A lot of people are scared of Saturn. And I wanted to play something that I think represents the essence of the fear that surrounds Saturn. And Keren, is the first time you're listening to it. And I want to hear your genuine response to that clip I found on YouTube.
The pressure's on.
Of all the planets, we fear Saturn the most. Saturn has an awful reputation.
Wow. That was really hypnotic.
I was watching this in the bath and I wanted to call someone.
I think I just felt like purring or something like that listening to that.
Yeah, and I think this woman, she gets Saturn. Saturn is a planet, it rules Capricorn, which is also a sign that a lot of time is people see as very serious and a bit boring and career driven and kind of like the people that love the long journey. We said they plan their life when they're 3, and that's why, because Saturn is their planet. Quick story to give you an example of the people that are ruled by Saturn, the Capricorns. I was getting a green smoothie this week, obviously.
Shut up.
Because if it costs $20 and it has the promise of health, I'll get it. I'll buy it. And I was getting this smoothie, and this person was so nice to me. This guy, we matched on Tinder, but we didn't go there because of history with other people. I'm not going to go into it.
Next episode, please.
We also never acknowledged it, but we always very nice to each other. Anyway, I was getting my smoothie, and then I asked him, what's your star sign? Because he was so happy and bubbly. And then he said, I'm Capricorn. And my obviously unfiltered reaction was, you're too happy to be a Capricorn. And he said, and he just turned so serious. And he said, well, my job is to be happy because I work in hospitality. And that's why I'm happy. And I was like, oh, now I get it. The only way for a Capricorn to be bubbly or happy is if it's defined in their job requirement.
Yeah, if it's a goal that they can achieve, an ambition that they can work towards.
So that's a little bit about Capricorn and about Saturn. Now, what is Saturn's return?
Saturn's return. Well, how do we pronounce it is one question, but Saturn returns is a phenomenon in astrology which occurs for anyone, really, when the planet of Saturn does one full complete orbit around the sun. So that tends to happen every 29 and a half years. So we've spoken about this on our first episode, but if you're interested to know where does Saturn fall in your chart, you can always get the time of your birth and the date of your birth and go online and find out. But Saturn returns will happen when Saturn, wherever it was when you were born, 29 and a half years later, although it starts happening from about 27, 28, depending on your particular chart, when it makes a full orbit. And a lot of very significant, powerful things happen at the culmination of that orbit.
Like what?
I think one of the ways I've heard it described is as a cosmic bar mitzvah. So it's a real coming of age. And Itai, as you were talking about Saturn, the planet, it's known to be very serious, the taskmaster, the life coach. So Saturn is where our life lessons are learned. So how it usually manifests for people is that when you're turning about 30 or maybe 27, 28, you start to realize what you need to shed or what no longer serves you. And a lot of people go through a crisis of identity, a crisis of life lessons, and they go through a bit of a metamorphosis. So
one of our friends, just as we're recording this episode, one of our friends is dyeing the tips of her hair pink.
Yeah, and look, she goes through a bit of a metamorphosis every few hours.
It's true.
And she's probably forgotten that she's dyed her hair pink and she's left it in, without rinsing it out. But for general normal people, 29 and a half years, if you've experienced that yourself or you're coming up to that time, you might notice a couple of existential crises, a couple of questions popping up. And it's a really exciting transformational time, or it can be a really challenging, miserable time, depending on how you meet that transformation.
And we're going to also talk about how to deal with your Saturn return in the best way possible. But I found something very interesting that I would love to share, that even in Judaism, which is a completely different religion or outlook of the world than astrology, in the Talmud, which is basically a bunch of rabbis arguing about a lot of things.
The creepy part of the Torah.
It's the creepy, but also the most exciting part of the Torah.
Oh, yeah.
It's the oral Torah, and it was written 1,500 years ago. And even then, I want to read you this bit. So this is in the Talmud, and it says, our rabbis taught, he who sees the sun at its turning point, the moon in its power, the planets in their orbits, and the signs of the zodiac in their orderly progress, should say, blessed he who has wrought the work of creation. So they say there is a time where you need to bless God. And then they ask, but when does this happen? And one of these rabbis, a very spiritual one, I would guess, his name was Abaye, answers, every 28 years, when the cycle begins again, and the equinox falls on Saturn. So even 1,500 years ago, in a completely different religion, this rabbi goes, every time Saturn completes a cycle, you need to bless God and you need to kind of acknowledge that this is a powerful moment for you. How do we find a way to give it a good example of Saturn's return? Who in our lives had a good Saturn return?
Well, I think because no one in our lives have had positive Saturn returns, I think
everyone's
people have had
their shit.
Yeah, losing their shit. I think the baddest bitch I can think of is Riri, who I usually turn to in my hours of need. So throughout my own Saturn returns, when I've been losing my own shit, I've thought, well, what would Riri do, and how is she traveling during this really pivotal time? And every time I flick on her Instagram, which is every couple of hours when I'm on the toilet, she's just glowing and she's soaring like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
And to those of you who are not properly educated, when we say Riri, we mean Rihanna, the singer.
Sorry.
Rihanna Robin Fenty. And she is going and has been going through her Saturn returns in an amazing, inspiring way. And Any examples?
So many, even.
Where to begin?
Where to begin? Like, we can begin now in the present, where she's just released her newest lingerie line called Savage, which is all about body positive women from different backgrounds and different shapes and sizes, different stories, all looking beautiful and hot in lingerie. It is a bit of a tacky lingerie line, but she really loves it and she owns it and she's really promoting it hard.
And I think it's no coincidence that it took her 30 years to, come full circle with her Saturn's return and say, I am promoting this as someone that, if you look back at her career, she definitely started as someone that was very conventionally hot and aiming to be hot in that way. And now she's literally celebrating different type of beauty. And with her lingerie line, with her makeup line. And she's been saying on interviews how she always wanted to do makeup. And she's tried and she's tried and she tried. And then suddenly it clicks. And that suddenly was when she was 2 years ago and she started to go through her Saturn return. And that's, I think, a perfect example. Another example is the fact that she also gained weight. And also that's, in a way, Saturn's telling her, you need to not pay attention to your body and to the way you look, because the journey that Saturn is taking her on is, I guess, being more connected to her artistic vibe.
And I think she actually has still stayed as connected to how she looks, but she's loving herself and owning it in a different way. So she's still her makeup line, her lingerie. It's all about feeling hot, looking sexy. And she's become more experimental and wild with her fashion. But she's told everyone, like, I've gained a couple of kilos, but I still feel hot. I still feel beautiful, and you should too. So I really love that about her Saturn returns, and I think she's absolutely smashed it creatively and
with her
spiritually.
Music, definitely. And I think that's our biggest tip for you, the listeners. And if you're sitting now freaking out, how am I going to survive this Saturn return? How am I going to come out on the other side stronger and better and fatter like Rihanna, but loving myself like Riri? The best way to do it is to give in to Saturn and to give into the challenge at Saturn. Saturn's going to take you through a challenge. Saturn's going to take you through a lesson, and it's going to ask you to face that part of your life. And the more you give in and the less you resist, the more rewarded you're going to come out on the other side. And the best way to do it is to look on your chart where your Saturn is located and see where is Saturn present in your life. So if Saturn's, like for you, Keren, Saturn is placed with Sagittarius, which means maybe your challenge will be about traveling and going away or learning from a different culture or being adopted by a different culture. For me, Saturn is in Capricorn, so it's going to be maybe about career or realizing that the goal is not always, doesn't always justify the means. But to make it even better and easier for you, we're going to talk a little bit about WWTSD. What would the star signs
Sounds
do?
like a STD.
It sounds like an STD. I know nothing about STDs. Definitely don't have any at the moment. What would the star signs do during their Saturn return?
What would they do? Well, who should we start with this week, Etai? Because I feel like we often start with Aries, but I think I want to know.
Taurus, because that was supposed to be their episode.
Yeah, Taurus, it's so boring.
No, we shouldn't. Let's start with someone else.
Okay, maybe Cancer. How do Cancerians experience their Saturn returns?
We went really hard on Cancerians in the past few episodes, and I want to say, Cancerians, you guys are ruled by the moon. You're a water sign, you're connected to your feelings and your emotions, and that's why people joke that you're so sad. But I think Saturn return for Cancerians is so beneficial because they take all of these emotions and they wrap it into something good, productive. I think this is the time where Cancerians excel in either like in their jobs, being helpful to others. I think it's either the time where they start therapy because all their emotions need to be channeled into therapy, or they stop therapy because they kind of like
I got this.
worked hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a positive
What about-
manifestation. What do you reckon about Libra? I think Librans